All right, welcome. Welcome to our debate. Today, we are going to be deciding what is the best way to fix hunger. Should it be with the poverty approach, or should it be with the food approach? Our first team to present their argument today is going to be Team 1, that is arguing poverty-based approach. You may begin.
Okay. Well, yeah, you talk.
So basically with us, like, have been doing the food-centered approach for years. Something is still not clicking, something's still not working. So we think that if we're able to work like with the poverty-centered approach and like work with the minimum wage and raising it, then we will be more applicable to get those people out of poverty, because they will have access to like more food, like groceries. Like if they're able to make this more money, then they can potentially buy a car to get them out of food deserts, to get them out of places where they don't have the opportunity to get the nutritious food that they need. I really told y'all debates make me queasy.
Expand, everybody should contribute.
Well, okay. So in the 1960s, the minimum wage was about $4. And if that would have continued with inflation today, minimum wage would be over $10, almost $11. And because we're still, we say like $5 under what it should be, that's part of the reason that there's so many people in poverty, because because inflation happens no matter what we do about it, but nobody's changed the wages, and it's stayed the same for this long. So even if we do increase the wages, that will help generate more revenue within the, just in the economy in general. So people will have more disposable income. They can make better choices about what foods to buy. And that will also add more tax revenue into the economy. It's not raising, it's not taking away taxes. But because we're making more money, the government is getting more taxes. And so that will help aid the programs that we do have already in place.
And this article that we found shows that if minimum wage were to be raised to the $10.86 an hour, that would be equal, or that would be relative to what minimum wage was in the 1960s, and that could lift 4 million Americans out of poverty. And if you think of 4 million Americans being able to spend more money in the economy, that would get the economy flowing, and inflation obviously wouldn't have to raise as much because things would be being purchased with the money that was there. And that's 4 million people whose income tax would be added to the programs that, like Bailey was saying, that we're already getting income taxes, but that's 4 million more people whose income would be impacting those taxes.
And inflation is happening naturally. So like with that cop that they were talking about in like the documentary that we watched, in 3 years, like has gotten no raise, and unfortunately like the grocery that he's buying that was lasting him a month to a month and a half is lasting his family 2 to 3 weeks. So inflation is happening rapidly, naturally, and nothing is going along with it to make it more beneficial for the people below that line.
So we think that the food-centered approach is more of a short-term way to help people get out of hunger. But we think if we focus more on poverty instead of more on fixing poverty than fixing people's hunger, if we did fix poverty, people would be able to feed themselves and they wouldn't be hungry. So we think the poverty-centered approach would be a more long-term, like a more sustainable way to end hunger than the food-centered approach.
Just keep reiterating it, it's a debate. The more you repeat it, the more.
Like she said, food banks are only helping temporarily, like they're not fixing the problem they're just helping the problem, and they're not fixing anything, because if we just keep using food banks, then they're always going to have the need for them.
I'm an equal opportunist, so I'll let you all have an opportunity to speak.
We have our opportunity to speak,
No.
or they do?
We have people to contribute.
I mean, it's true.
Food insecurity has increased in the past 20 years, and all we've tried is the food-centered approach. So why not try something different?
What do you have to add, Brant? Fish in the line. Fish in the line. Hey, Brant. Over the last 8 years, the poverty line, the income has raised their poverty.
I can't read your lips right now.
So income is increasing, but so is the poverty level, so something's wrong.
Okay,
Yes.
what'd you say?
Can I speak for Brant?
Yes.
Yes, last point.
So, I'm gonna carry on for Brant. In the last 8 years, the income level has increased, but the poverty level has climbed with that. So again, just like reiterate, like the poverty-centered approach, like with the food-centered approach, like something's not working. And like with us not have trying anything other than like the food-centered approach, I think with what Stephanie said, like this poverty-centered approach is a long-term potential fix. That's from Brant.
Very good. So now I turn the debate over to team number 2, who is going to be arguing for the food-centered approach. Take it away.
I get like debate anxiety, sorry. Okay. Time after time, we've seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that little triangle pyramid, and at the very bottom, it's physiological. So we're starting with food, air, water, shelter's in there. But if we're not giving people food at all, we shut down food banks theoretically. They're not getting the proper nutrition to control the internal chemical and physical aspects of their life, therefore they're not capable of the bare minimum. So by not providing food, it's affecting them in all matters.
Yeah, whoever wants to the next one.
Okay.
Like, y'all talked about poverty and how the food-centered approach is only temporary. Well, without the food-centered approach, how would those people with poverty be surviving? It may be a temporary fix, but we're still feeding them.
And then you guys talked about raising minimum wage, and here in the past few years, we've actually had people try to raise the minimum wage, and a lot of places can't due to the fact that companies can't afford to do it, and if they do, then they are going to have to cut jobs, which means people are going to be without jobs, which means without income, and then they're going to hit poverty, and then you guys would want to take away the food banks and help like that, so then they would just starve to death.
All right, in addition to that, first of all, I kind of nerd out on Maslow's hierarchy of needs because it's huge in my major, let's be real. It's maybe the most important thing when it comes to effective teaching and students and the ability to learn. So, like we mentioned, food is a physiological need. It is base level. You cannot achieve pretty much anything else if you're not taking care of your physiological needs, right? You guys argued about employment and higher wages, and I just want to let you know that that's part of safety needs, which is above physiological needs. So I'm just reiterating everything we just said, that you cannot be reaching higher wages or getting a good job and better employment, and you ultimately cannot pull yourself out of poverty if you're not meeting your need for food. Okay, that's it.
And then I have one more thing to add. You guys talked about shutting down food banks, but if you also look at that, that's also a form of employment, and they are employing people. So you would also be putting people out of jobs once again, so.
On top of that, you guys are saying like food center approach isn't working right now and it's very base level. But I think it would work if we did more research on it and actually talk to the farmers, ranchers, all of that about it when they have to get rid of all their milk or meat products, and we're not talking to them about it. We're going strictly to food banks and trying to help them out when they don't have any money. And also, we don't know where all this money is going to go if they do get raises. Is it going to go towards house bills or maybe new clothes or a car? It's not going to go towards food, and it's not going to help. They're still going to be in poverty, and they're not going to be getting the food that they deserve or need. I also have something to add to that. So the video that we watched the other day pointed out the fact that these people have the mindset of poverty and everything's temporary. So just because they have more money and can get it, like you said, doesn't mean it's guaranteed that they're going to be spending it on food because they think that they're not going to have it. So if they continue just to spend it, spend it, spend it.
You can't keep working at McDonald's the rest of your life. I mean, if you work at McDonald's, you work at McDonald's for like a family of four, that's all the income you bring home, you're still going to be in poverty.
All right, any more to your argument?
And kind of what, like he just said, going off of the minimum wages, so they, with everything increasing and stuff like that, there's a very high chance that they aren't going to even be able to afford food if they get a higher wage as is, because they're already struggling. Like, yeah, they're going to get $1, $2 more, but what is that really going to get them?
All right, so now both teams have had a chance to provide arguments for their side. So now I'm going to open it up for rebuttal, and we're going to start first with Team 1, that you can now provide some arguments back to Team 2. So what I'd like to see during this is y'all can ask them questions. Team 2, you can answer, but Team 2, you can't be asking questions of them, okay? All right, Team 1, take it away.
I got one question for you though, does it have to be a question?
No, it can be a statement or
Okay.
response to something they said. Yeah.
Okay, so like, I feel like 75% of what was just said at us was that we want to get rid of food banks, but we're not talking about right now food bank and only focusing on poverty, because like you also focused on, yes, people do have to eat, but the intention is to eventually work away from people relying on food banks and instead getting out of that poverty mindset where they have the money to afford food and they have the money to live without having to worry about it disappearing. So it's not a fact of just instantly dropping food banks like they never existed and never did anything, because there is a benefit. But if we work people to, or if we get people to where they don't have to rely on food banks, then we won't need food banks to be a main source of food for people.
Yeah, and also, we weren't really talking about closing the food banks, but if we were, and those people did starve, and those people were into poverty, then we would no longer have poverty. So that would also
I have a question. What did I say?
Darwin, if we don't give people the
It's just, well,
Okay, what else?
so I have a question. How many of y'all got cars when you turned 16? Or 17? Did y'all get a car that you were able to drive when you, did you get a license and the capability to drive? None of y'all did?
At 16? At 16, no.
Okay, do y'all have vehicles now?
Yeah.
Correct. So those vehicles allow you to go to like Sonic, right, or Walmart. And so my question is, when you made the comment about a new car, them spending that money with us raising the minimum wage, does that new car not allow them to go to grocery stores that have more options? Or places that help them, like therapy or like going to work?
But with a new car, you also have an expense to pay for the fuel, the insurance, if there's damage repair, or if it breaks down, and then the cost of the car payout.
So
So
I
are they even
guess-
gonna come up with that? I don't
But
think.
also, we don't know if they're gonna directly go get food, or what they're gonna do with that money, no guarantee. Not.
Oh, but, correct. But do we not want to give these people more choices? They're human.
Is a minimum wage of $10, I guess, from our point of view, is a minimum wage of $10 really making that allowance?
Well,
I mean, that's approximately.
Sorry, that was a question.
Coming
to that.
So that's like $3.75 more an hour that they're making now, per 1 hour.
so, if they're working minimum wage right now and they're working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, they're getting $290, which is $15,080. And if we raised it up and they did it 8 hours a day, that's $98. And so they get $23,400 at the end of the year. So granted, it's not like dollars a raise, but like every little bit helps. And so like if we're able to raise that one, we're giving them more opportunities to be human and make those choices, as well as go back over here, like giving them the options. And so like granted, they may go to the grocery store, they may go to the liquor store, per se. But
And is that like, keep food banks around, but also focus more. The problem with poverty, yes, there fits a lot. Maslow's hierarchy of needs will be met, because food banks will still be around until it's available to people until they don't need them anymore. And if people are able to make more money and provide for themselves and like get themselves out of poverty, they're going to be able to meet even more of those needs in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You'll talk about raising minimum wage for them to be able to afford things, but I think the bigger picture is, yes, you raise minimum wage, but sometimes it's a matter of location. Like, how does raising minimum wage bring in more jobs that are available to these people, or companies coming in, if that makes sense? Just because you raise minimum wage doesn't mean.
so we've talked about this. So like raising the minimum wage, it's not necessarily like making things more expensive, it's budgeting. And it's where those companies are spending their money and like how they're at it, or I can't say the right word, I'm gonna say the wrong verbiage.
Allocating.
That's the one. And so, does that answer like what you're
That was a
saying?
question I wasn't supposed to ask, but yes, that makes
Well,
sense.
let's switch to team 2 now, asking Reba a question.
She's like, no, I'm messing this up.
I just have like a statement to go along with the question that wasn't supposed to be a question. I know you said that you don't, like, you wouldn't be intentionally raising prices, and I get that when raising the minimum wage, right? Like, you're not obviously intending to raise the cost of living, but you have to look at like the process through which these companies have to like actually implement a higher wage. Like, not everyone can afford to actually give their minimum wage employees $10+ an hour, and so then they have to raise the prices of their goods and services, and therefore overall it's really not doing that much good.
I have a question back to that. Would you be willing to spend 50 cents more on a hamburger if it meant someone could afford to feed their family?
But that's the thing, are they even gonna be able to afford that extra 50 cents more?
Like, we might be able to.
Yes, but what I'm saying is 50 cents for your one purchase is gonna help the company make more money, and in turn let those people get paid $15 or $10 an hour so that they can make $8,000 more a year.
But we just raised our minimum wage. Like, I see it as like, let's say we're both business people. I just had to raise my people to 10, and now I can't afford that extra 50 cents because I did have to raise my minimum wage to $10 per person. Does that make sense?
Wait,
I
you
can't
guys
afford the
should-
extra 50 cents because I had to go and raise my minimum wage.
Product pricing. That's business.
So I'm gonna look somewhere else that's cheaper.
So you're still focusing on making money, you're not focusing on taking care of your employees perhaps. We're assuming that these companies
are being responsible in how they treat their employees, but bottom line is a lot of companies aren't caring unless you're a high up executive, sadly, but.
So I'm allowed to say statements?
Yes, we're gonna just open it. I
From-
think I'm going to have it open anyway. This has been a very unstructured debate, but I like it. Go for it.
According to our reading, the very last paragraph, in fact, says, according to a poverty-centered perspective, food insecurity will likely remain widespread in the United States for as long as Americans accept unusually high rates of poverty as a normal condition.
I want to piggyback off of you. You guys, whenever you were giving your opening statement, I feel like you guys mentioned the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you didn't really make any further points of how you're bettering the system. Because if we stay with the food base, then it's going to keep going. We're going to keep on the same way that we're doing things. So what is your idea? Like, what is going to fix it with the food-based approach?
Hold on, repeat that question, sorry, I like spaced out halfway through, so much in the middle.
Why is the food-based approach gonna fix it? Like, what are steps to take in order to improve people being able to provide for themselves?
Gotcha. So I do have to say, I would like to go off of what Alaska's put into their system, and where else did you say? Here, kind of? In Oklahoma?
There's like different rural areas.
So, in Oklahoma, or in Alaska, the game wardens, if they see an injured elk or like any animal, what they do is they go out and they manually put the animal down, and then they'll donate that meat back to the food pantry, so that gives them some more protein in a different way of like a starch. So we're gonna deal with putting more food out there without taking away money, and like if we implement that, I think that will help more people around us.
Okay, but I think Bailey's question more so was like, how is that gonna solve hunger or as a whole? Because yes, those people are gonna get a meal out of that animal, but how are they gonna ultimately get out of being hungry every single meal?
So when do you guys plan on seeing somebody be like dependent on themselves to buy food, with keeping food banks and food pantries and SNAP and all those benefits available? When do you plan on having those people get off of that?
I think we should start a program that gradually helps them to get through that.
SNAP
I
does
think,
not
okay,
already.
so there is SNAP programs and everything, and I think ultimately when they set those in place, they were hoping that many people would use this and continuously keep trying to get out of poverty. They might have a job, and that's the reason they can't have SNAP, is if they're able-bodied, they're working, and they're in poverty. I know people who have gotten out of food stamps and everything because they continuously keep working towards the higher goal of getting out of it. Not everyone has that mindset. Everyone they just don't care enough to do that. So we're not saying that it's the best approach, but it's something that continuously keeps working towards the higher goal of getting out of poverty.
When do you see it, the food-centered approach fixing hunger? As poverty continues to rise in the United States.
Very good question.
I couldn't hear you.
Oh, you couldn't hear me? When do you see the food-centered approach fixing hunger as poverty continues to stick around and even rise? It's probably, especially right now during this time of COVID in the United States. I mean, we keep increasing the amount of food banks and ways to help people feed themselves, but at the end of the day, it's really not helping people come out of poverty.
Which keeps them hungry.
Back to my statement before. Anyways, I was like, I totally agree with y'all. It's only a temporary fix. Yes, sorry y'all, jumped the ship here, but it is only a temporary fix. But as I stated, yes, people are still hungry with the SNAP program, food banks, and all that. But it's still feeding them. Without the food center approach, where would we be? like, where would we be? Honestly, where would these people be getting their food without the food banks or the snack program?
And like I also said earlier, we're not trying to instantly get rid of the food-based approach because I think at first it has to be both. Both have to work together at first because people do need to eat to be able to work, to be able to get out of poverty. But we're trying to end hunger for good, not for now.
But how are you guys gonna implement that the minimum wage that you guys raise it to, that extra money is gonna go to making sure that they have food or get?
Well, how are we doing that now?
Yeah, we can say that they have to spend their SNAP benefits on food, but any other money they're making, they can spend on whatever they want, just as they would no matter how much money they're
And if they're hungry, they're gonna buy food.
But how many of them got the stimulus checks during COVID? Gotta take that into consideration, because maybe the majority of them did not get the stimulus check. So if they buy food, then what are they gonna do with the rest of the stimulus check?
Buy more food.
Or are they gonna buy new clothes?
But what about this impoverished mindset that we've already learned about in this class, where people just immediately search for like instant forms of gratification or joy? You know, they're in that mindset already, which I know you guys mentioned like previously. Like I heard you and I understand that. But like, how do you guys expect to change their mindset over time? Like I get that you eventually, like you're not saying right now let's take away the food banks and food pantries, and I appreciate that mindset of like making them work together. But eventually you are saying like we're gonna decrease the reliance, I guess, on food-centered approaches like over time.
I think if people are able to make more money than just making ends meet, they're going to have extra. I'm trying to figure out words here. They're going to have extra at the end of the day to be able to spend it on things that they also want after buying food.
I mean, that's what makes
It's
us
not going to
human.
happen overnight. Like, you guys seen Outer Banks?
Yeah.
The poor kid, or Schitt's Creek or whatever. People are poor, and as soon as they get a $30,000 check, they go and buy a freaking hot tub and all kinds of crazy things. But what if they get another $30,000 check the next year? Or not all at one time. What if they make another $26,000 next year?
But then what, are they gonna be like, what town was it that we watched where they went and bought the house, they had things, but like whenever you went inside, they were still poor and they couldn't afford it. So are they gonna spend the money in the wrong area?
I think.
So I'm gonna pause here for sake of time. We're gonna technically end the debate. Everybody take a deep breath. Let's talk regardless of what side you're on.
So I'm thinking, like, trying to end that mindset. I mean, if you, let's say, I don't know this from experience, but like if a kid comes from this situation and you give them a meal, they're gonna eat it as fast as they can because they don't know when they're gonna get to eat next. And so whenever they realize that there's consistency there, that they are getting their next meal. So if we go from not making any money, yeah, we might blow the first check. But whenever we realize that, oh, as long as I keep working and taking care of business, then I can rely on that.
That's what I was trying to say.
I knew what you were getting at.
Well, I'm kind of having like a support system to help through that process to understand. Because do we all make responsible decisions all the time?
No.
Absolutely not.
No. Sometimes we make dumb decisions, right?
Pretty much.
For my food approach side, how are y'all feeling? Because Brianna kind of brought that up. She's like, but we've been talking about everything but this. How are we supposed to argue it now? I mean, where do y'all kind of just lie personally? I mean,
I think like in the middle, I like in the middle approach. Like, I think we do need to always have some type of food center approach. Keep the food pantries and stuff open because they're like no matter what, things are gonna happen and people are gonna be without jobs and they're gonna need that help. But also I think like there does need to be raises and stuff like that, but maybe do it at a very slow increase. That way people aren't losing jobs.
Yeah, it does kind of have to be this middle approach in the sense of, and someone mentioned it in the debate that, and even the chapter talks about, you know, do we differentiate between what hunger is, like that physiological, like rumble in your belly, you need food now, versus insecurity, which is long-term inadequate nutrition, right, or access to food. And so food-centered approach does help a lot in the short term. And what they found, and even the chapter talks about it, is most people who go to those short-term places like food banks and stuff aren't even on SNAP benefits, right? Like it's really for emergencies that happens. But what we've kind of done is we've used these short-term solutions for hunger as also long-term solutions for food insecurity. And that's not working either, right? So maybe the approach is we've got to still have these food-based approaches for short-term hunger, but maybe we need to be looking at some of these more poverty-based approaches to actually address long-term food insecurity. And it's hard, I think as a whole, and it's hard not to like talk about politics because that's how decisions are made, right, in a lot of this. But I hope it helps us see that we can't get so entrenched in parties to not just make a decision, because do any of these opinions fit specifically within one party or the other? No. Like they cross boundaries. We've got to start acting more collaboratively to have decisions for these things. We can't just get stuck and say, I think this way, and I'm like, you know what I mean? Because that's contributing a lot to like us not coming to this middle ground conclusion here. Another thing that I think is interesting is just to think about is this idea of like what happens if wages increase and money, you know, things like that. Again, you kind of have proponents on both sides that can look at different analyses and tell you different things. But I like to, again, you know, part of what we study in ag leadership is human behavior, motivation, why people do the things that they do. How can we influence and help change some of that human behavior? And then what ethics are involved in it? And do people always act ethically? You know, like we want to assume that they will, but we don't know. And so kind of going to the conversation y'all had about like, well, if I charge 50 more cents for a hamburger, is that really going to help a company pay someone a better wage? We have to realize this is definitely like a cultural viewpoint. We tend to view things that we're only going to give to something if we get back from it. Whereas other cultures will say, we will give regardless of who gets from it. Like I may never, but because I see a societal benefit to it, I'm willing to do it. Then we'll say, well, we should have forced people to have to give. But that's assuming everyone acts altruistically, right? So, I mean, could you ask people to give $10 every month to ensure that there's a pot of money for the people who need that pot of money to help them out in a short-term situation? Or do we just sit and wait and maybe only half of the people would actually contribute something to it? You know, that's one of the questions that gets wrestled with a lot that I think is hard to kind of come to a consensus on there too, is what's the best way to do? Because that goes back to that cultural engravement of, do we see this as a, what we call quid pro quo? We're only going to do something if we get something out of it. If I'm not going to individually get something out of it, I shouldn't have to contribute. Or do we say at some point poverty is a societal issue, we'll contribute to it even if it's not something that I will ever see money back from? I don't know. I think that's where a lot of the conversation culturally right now has gone with this. For Tuesday, the next chapter that y'all are reading, the PDF is in Canvas. It's talking a little bit more still about SNAP, but now we're starting to look into other food programs like school lunches and WIC and getting some data on those things. I just had this epiphany last night and I'm like, why did I not think about this before last night? My neighbor, literally my neighbor, is one of the head folks for Oklahoma Department of Families and Children. I don't know the acronym here in Oklahoma. But before he got that position, he was head of Oklahoma's SNAP program. And I'm like, he would have been a great person to bring to class, like duh. So one thing I would like for y'all to think about, if you were able to talk to him, his name is Patrick, what would you want to know? What would you want to ask him? Because again, that's all he's done his entire life, is work, well, since graduation. And he's in his mid-40s now, so 20 years. He's worked with providing SNAP benefits to people in Oklahoma, and now he kind of oversees school lunch programs, all that kind of stuff. What would you want to ask him? And so if you have some specific questions, email them to me, because I am going to ask him if he could Zoom in with us on Tuesday. I have no idea what his schedule looks like on Tuesday, but I think that'd just be pretty cool for y'all to get to hear from him about his perspective and what he's been able to do in his career and what have you. So, any last thoughts?
So are we meeting in person on Tuesday?
Wait, okay.
I have a last thought. Have you ever been to a concert or a school assembly or something, or a church service or something, and they show you like little kids that you can give $7 or something, like you adopt them and you send money to help them? What if they did that for people in poverty, where you have like you had a picture of them and is there a thing like that that I've never seen before? You have a picture of them, you could write letters to them and stuff, and you could, I think that would make things more personal and help people. Like,
I mean, all they have in Oklahoma is like the Angel Tree program during Christmas. And I think if they did that like throughout the whole entire year, people would be willing to do it.
But there's such a stigma to it. And there's also this thing called moral consciousness, where like we do things only that makes us feel better about ourselves. And there's something about us as Americans that we just feel really good if we're adopting children from other countries and like whatever. But yet we don't ever want to admit that we may have people next door that are in those same dire situations. And those people, because of the stigma we have in our culture, don't want people to know they are in those situations. It's really complex.
It'd have to be more of an anonymous thing than no.
Yeah, like the angel trees are all anonymous.
Yeah.
We very much have a moral consciousness about that. Good or bad. All right, guys, this was fun today. Sorry if I stressed y'all out.
Okay.
Yeah, seriously, y'all think about questions you'd want to ask Patrick.
Until 5:45.
Even if he can't zoom in, I may still be like, well, our kids are